What's good, everybody? It's Robo back on another video, and today I've got my college football week 13 picks. We've got 62 FBS games this week and a few huge ones, and I'm going over every single one of them as usual. But before I get into everything, let me go ahead and recap the week 12 results. Week 12 was alright picks-wise. I had a great week picking winners again, going 38-15, but a rough Saturday against the spread, going just under 500 overall again. But again, some pretty close score predictions and a decent day in the tougher games to pick at least. So heading into week 13, I'm in need of a good week. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this week's picks and get started in order of kickoff time as usual. Week 13 action opens up with Akron at Kent State battling for the wagon wheel. As the two worst teams in the MAC this season, this game could be a tough watch, but at least Akron has grabbed a couple wins this season. Kent State still sits at 0-10 with non-competitive losses all over the place. Both these teams are flat out awful all around, and the only thing going Kent State's way with this one is getting up for the rivalry game at home. But I don't really think it's going to matter that much. They should be able to score here and there against a weak Akron defense to keep it close. But at 0-10, there's just not much of a reason to pick them to win this one. I like Akron 31-24. Game 2 Tuesday is Western at Central. Another trophy battle, this time played for the victory cannon. Western has played some pretty bad football the last 2 weeks after an undefeated start through the first 4 conference games, and now sits in a potential must-win scenario for bowl hopes on the road against their rival. They've got Eastern Michigan at home next week, so a loss isn't the end of the world, but obviously they've got a few reasons to be more than fired up for this one. They've really struggled to stop the run lately, and that's pretty much all Central can do right now with their quarterback situation, so I don't expect this to come easy for Western, but with a near zero threat to pass from Central and just 30 points over the last 3, I like Western to win on the road, 30-20. The last of the Tuesday triple header is by far the best looking matchup, Northern Illinois at Miami, Ohio. Statistically, 2 of the best teams in the conference and the top 2 defenses. This should be a heavily contested, low-scoring battle that either team has a chance to win. And seeing that NIU is virtually eliminated from conference championship hopes, Miami's got a clear edge and a reason for effort here. Currently atop the MAC standings, a loss would put their hopes in jeopardy. Both teams are playing great ball the last few weeks, but with Miami sitting on a 5-game stretch of near dominance and an extra edge for this game, I think they'll take this one close, 24-20. On to Wednesday, we've got 2 more in the MAC, starting with Eastern Michigan and Buffalo. Eastern season has really spiraled downhill, losing 3 straight and 4 out of 5. They face good competition, but a loss to Akron really put them in a bad spot here. They're a win away from going bowling and have a road rivalry matchup coming up next week with Western Michigan, so this may be an absolute must-win game here on senior night. Buffalo's offense has been incredible the past 2 weeks, but they've really been hit or miss all season long, especially on the road where they've taken down NIU, but also got destroyed by Ohio and UConn. With the variance, this is definitely going to be a toss-up for me, but with bowl eligibility on the line, I gotta take the Eagles at home, 31-28. Our last weekday action this week is another great one with Ohio at Toledo. 2 solid teams looking to keep their conference title hopes alive, but with Toledo needing a bit of help on top of the win here. Regardless, a ton is on the line, and both teams should be ready for a fight, and statistically, this game is pretty even. Ohio's absolutely rolling though, taking 3 straight over simply inferior opponents, but all in blowout fashion, and Toledo kind of having a disappointing year in conference despite having a shot here. Still, last week's win may have relit a spark they needed though, and this team is still one of the best in the conference. I think they pick up a close win here on senior night to keep their hopes alive heading into the final week, 27-21. Georgia Tech is back from their bye week and maybe well timed as they're coming off that big emotional win over Miami. That was an incredible game to watch and a heck of a performance from that defense, but now they've got to refocus and hope to not get hit with a trap game here taking on NC State. This Wolfpack team struggled a couple weeks ago with Duke, but had some pretty strong offensive showings recently and still has a chance at bowl eligibility sitting at 5-5. Duke's defense just really stuffed the run and made life hard on CJ Bailey, and I could definitely see Tech doing the same. But I really think Miami game took everything they had, and they really may just not perform to that same standard here. I'm going to take them to win the game because they're just the better team at home, but I think NC State will hang around in this one. I've got a 34-28 final for the Yellow Jackets. UTSA takes on Temple this week, who have just happened to have fired their head coach after last week's overtime win over FAU. It's no doubt been a rough few seasons for the Owls, and a change may have been needed, but even prior to a change in command, this matchup did not look great for them. UTSA's offense is rolling right now, dropping 44 on Memphis and 48 on North Texas, both teams with much more talent than this Temple squad. Along with that, UTSA is still a win away from bowl eligibility here. I have a hard time seeing any reason to think Temple stands a chance here. Give me the Roadrunners in the Alamo Dome, 41-21. Purdue heads to Michigan State Friday night looking to avoid a 1-win season as they've got another rough one with Indiana coming next week. Just a brutal schedule this year for an already disastrous Purdue team. They've been brutal even in games they really stood a chance in, dropping a home game in Northwestern a few weeks ago. Michigan State's had some ugly losses lately and look pretty rough themselves, but still have some solid hope at reaching a bowl with their final 2 being this one and Rutgers at home. I think Michigan State shows up to put another wrench in a Purdue season. Not in blowout fashion this time, but a 10th loss nonetheless, 30-20. Our last weeknight matchup comes with ranked UNLV on the road at San Jose State, with a lot on the line for the Rebels considering Colorado State's got a tough one this weekend. A win and a Ram loss would give them a real shot at a rematch with Boise for the Mountain West title, but San Jose State is no slouch, especially having to play them on the road. Despite the score last week, they hung around with Boise State for quite a while and were a few plays away from a much closer score. I think they've got enough offense to hang around here again, but UNLV time in and time again has found a way to survive these games besides the Boise loss. I think they keep their hopes alive with another tight win on the road, 34-31. Saturday starts off with the game of the week and one of the biggest games in program history for Indiana. The Hoosiers take on the Buckeyes from Columbus as a top 5 matchup. Indiana could be in the playoff regardless of the outcome of this game, but they're going to want to come and punch the Buckeyes in the mouth early and prove that they're for real. But this is far and away the biggest test of the season for the Hoosiers. Looking back at the schedule, yes, they've dominated, but not one ranked team is on that schedule. There is definitely a shot the committee snubs them if this one isn't competitive. Luckily for the Hoosiers, though, I think they're too well coached and have enough talent to not get blown out of the building here. But Ohio State obviously has the edge in the talent department, and I think that defense is just going to be way too much for Indiana, a lot like Michigan was in that second half. Give me Ohio State to separate late, 38-17. Ole Miss looks to stay in the playoff hunt on the road this week at Florida, a much peskier Gator team than expected this season as DJ Lagway has really emerged as a future star at quarterback, and the defense has held its own outside of that Texas game. This is definitely going to be a test for Ole Miss, and with the way they've played lately, they could definitely pass it with ease. But like I mentioned, Lagway has provided his team and fan base with a big reason to be amped up, especially for senior day. I think they'll keep this one a ball game for most of it, but Jackson Dart and the Rebels have too much to lose to pick against here. I'm taking Ole Miss by a touchdown, 31-24. Miami takes on Wake Forest this week, coming off the bye to regroup after the loss to Georgia Tech, and personally, I think this is a get-back type of game for Cam Ward and the Canes. They were really due for that loss with the way they played throughout the year, but they've got to win out now for their playoff hopes, and they just flat out outmatch Wake across the board. There is no reason this one should be close unless Miami comes out flat again. Wake Forest does have a decent offense, but they've really only been competitive in games against bottom feeders. I think the Canes come out hungry on both sides of the ball and win in convincing fashion this week, 45-17. SMU's on the road this week looking to continue ACC perfection, sitting at 6-0 in conference play and with a real shot at the playoffs. But this could be somewhat of a trap game on the road at Virginia. Virginia's been playing some rough ball lately, but picked up a solid road win at Pitt a few weeks ago and still has the potential to be a spoiler with their own bowl eligibility on the line. Last week was rough for the Cavs, but Musket fared pretty decently against the Irish and played a much better second half defensively. As for SMU, I really love watching Kevin Jennings play, and this offense can be electric. But last week, they got carved up by Boston College, and I think Grayson James being able to do that is a good sign for Virginia's offense finding some life here. But like they've done all year, I like SMU to survive and stay undefeated in ACC play with another hard-fought win on the road, 34-27. Over to the Big Ten, we've got AP-ranked Illinois on the road against a Rutgers team who's gotten back on track in recent weeks, putting a 4-game losing streak aside, taking down Minnesota and Maryland. And despite being ranked, I think this Illinois team sits in a similar area in toughness as both of those matchups were. And as a matter of fact, this Illinois team lost a home game to Minnesota a week before Rutgers beat them. Still dangerous, though, as we've seen with this group of the Big Ten. Anything can happen on a game-to-game basis. Illinois blew out Michigan State last week and could give Rutgers a tough game. But I think Rutgers' defense has been so strong lately and should continue to handle business, especially on senior day with how many vets are in that group. I'll take them here, 24-20. Iowa heads to Maryland this week as near touchdown favorites coming off the bye, but with a bit of a different look on offense after the UCLA loss. Brendan Sullivan is out for the year now, so the starting quarterback is going to be Cade McNamara again if he's able to go from that concussion. But the offense is obviously going to run through Caleb Johnson no matter what. Maryland's honestly been pretty decent against the run this year, though, so Iowa's going to have to win that battle or find the passing game to keep them honest. But seeing how they played against Rutgers last week, I don't think Maryland's going to have much more success against Iowa's defense here. I like Iowa on the road by 10, 27-17. Syracuse is back home this week after a huge win over Cal on the road. I had disrespected the Syracuse defense last week, but they really came to play and handle business against a solid Cal team. McCord was excellent again and kept the offense rolling, which I think will continue into this week as well. UConn's had a really nice season for their standards, but shouldn't really be a significant test for this team with the way their offense is playing. And they've really just been escaping with wins against Group of 5 teams. Syracuse should be able to control this game simply with just much better talent. I'm taking Syracuse 38-24. Boston College takes on North Carolina this week after a great effort in the loss to SMU. Grayson James put together a pretty strong performance considering what was expected for him by many, and they were in that game until the final drives despite being big underdogs. They've just got to win one of the next two to reach bowl eligibility, with either game looking fairly winnable, but obviously another level of importance entering this week. The Eagle defense is in for a tough one, though, as Omarion Hampton's coming off back-to-back incredible games. He's been absolutely carrying this offense to wins week in and week out and could definitely do it again here on the road. but Boston College isn't too bad against the run and has an offense playing well enough to find a groove, so they give me Boston College as home dogs this week over North Carolina, 31-28. Jacksonville State and Sam Houston has to be the game of the week in the Conference USA. Both teams with a ton on the line. A win gives Jacksonville State a ticket to the title game, and a Sam Houston win puts them tied for first with some rights for a tiebreaker. Jacksonville State was on a roll for a while, but has really cooled off lately defensively. The past 2 weeks, they've given up 37 to Louisiana Tech and 31 to Florida International. This Sam Houston offense has been dreadful themselves lately, though, and needed overtime to put away Kennesaw State last week. This is going to be a great matchup of a top defense and a top offense. I think it'll come down to the last possession, but considering I think the better team this year is also the home one in this one, I like Jacksonville State to win it, 30-27. Georgia hosts UMass this week, continuing the tradition of late season cupcakes from the SEC. The question here is, will they cover the 42-point spread? And I generally think they should be able to. This UMass team has definitely improved this season, but not enough to make a big difference. And as a result, they just let go of their head coach this past week. As rough as it's been this year for the offense and Carson Beck, they came alive against Tennessee and should be able to score at will in this game. UMass lost to Missouri by 42 a little over a month ago, and this Georgia team is far and away a better team, coming off a big win with a ton of reason to run up the score a bit. I think Georgia wins this one, 49-3. Tennessee's cupcake matchup is even easier with UTEP this week. Another one of the worst teams in all of the FBS this season. Their 2 wins on the year come over Kennesaw State and FIU, and they've taken some beatings from teams much worse than Tennessee as well. A 20-point loss to Sam Houston, 27 to Western Kentucky, 33 to Nebraska. Now with the loss of Georgia, Tennessee really needs to put on a show to get a chance at a playoff spot, and this is obviously a game where they can put up some big numbers. I thought Tennessee genuinely competed last week and were just a late touchdown away from covering. I've got them covering this week though, 52-6. Liberty and Western Kentucky face off this week with a ton on the line for both teams. A win for the Hilltoppers keeps them alive in the Conference USA race, tied for second, and a win for Liberty puts them a Sam Houston loss away for tied for second themselves. Neither team's coming off games to remember, as Western Kentucky lost a home game to Louisiana Tech after scoring just 7 points on the day, and Liberty was forced into overtime on the road at UMass. As a matchup, I actually think this one favors the Flames a bit. They're a run-heavy team, and the Hilltoppers have given up the 4th most rushing yards in the conference this year. And on the other end, the Hilltoppers have been pretty pass-heavy and face a Liberty defense giving up less than 200 through the air. I think they'll be able to stave off a great Western Kentucky team to make this last week in conference play super interesting, 30-27. The lone Saturday action comes with Bowling Green at Ball State. Bowling Green's offense is on fire, putting up around 400 yards in each of the last 4 games after the NIU loss. And Ball State's bowl hopes were shattered last week with an overtime loss to Buffalo. But besides that point, they've been playing some solid football lately, especially offensively. They hung with Vanderbilt in Miami, Ohio, and took down NIU and put up 48 in that loss last week. There's no reason to think they can't keep up that offensive momentum into this week and hang around with a Bowling Green team on Senior Day. Once again, a great team, but Ball State's proven they can hang, so I will take the Falcons on the road by just 10, 31-21. Rice is on the road at UAB this week, playing much better than early on. In recent weeks, they've hung around with Tulane, UConn, and Memphis, and took down Navy as well. But despite that, they sit in a similar spot as UAB team, missing a bowl this year. UAB has had an up and down year themselves, struck by some poor injury luck, but lately have been all over the place, dropping 59 on Tulsa, and the very next week blowing a lead to UConn, and then getting throttled by Memphis. I think deep down, this is a better team than their record shows, similarly to Rice, but definitely a shade worse and less dependable for sure. I think this is a winnable game if they decide to show up, but with neither team playing for anything, I'm going to take Rice to edge it out in the end, 31-27. Middle Tennessee hosts New Mexico State this week in another matchup of bottom FBS teams this season. New Mexico State coming off 3 straight L's in blowout fashion, and Middle Tennessee going back and forth with wins and losses the past 5 weeks, taking down Kennesaw State and UTEP by single digits, and being blown out in the others. These are the 2 worst defenses in the Conference USA, so we could finally see these offenses come alive. Middle Tennessee is really pass-heavy compared to New Mexico State's ground attack, so whichever finds more consistency is probably going to take this game. And playing at home, I think Middle Tennessee will be that team. They've just shown a bit more consistency this season, and the Aggies can't stop a cold. I'll go 28-24. James Madison broke the road struggles last week with a win over Old Dominion. It was close, but a 2-possession lead late in the 4th sealed the deal, and now puts the Dukes a game out of first in their division. First, let's go through another tough road test at Appalachian State this week. App State is fully against the wall now at 4-5, needing to win their last 2 to reach a bowl game, and still has an offense that can make things interesting, but the defense still cannot find a way to get stops to win ball games, giving up 38 to Coastal last week. James Madison is just a better team, so coming out of this bye, they've got to play better if they want a chance here. I think Joey Aguilar and the offense can score enough to keep them in this game, but coming down to the final drives, I can't trust to be able to get the stop they need. Give me JMU to escape again on the road, 35-30. Arizona finally got in the win column last week, taking down Houston at home in blowout fashion. Honestly, a bit of a shock to see considering how poorly they were playing basically all year long outside of the first few weeks, but Ted McMillan's an absolute nightmare to defend and can completely take over games if Arizona's in them. And with that win maybe giving them some new life to keep their season alive, there's a chance they can repeat that success enough to hang around here as well. TCU's a solid team with a great offense, top 3 in the Big 12 overall, but the defense has been poor all year long, especially against the run. Arizona should be able to score some points in this game and continue the rhythm they found last week. The issue is the Arizona defense has been even worse. You can't trust them to slow down this offense at all, so give me TCU to win it 38-30. Kennesaw State hosts Florida International this week, still looking for win number 2 on the year after back-to-back overtime losses to UTEP and Sam Houston. Both of these teams are playing their best ball the last 2 times out, as FIU blew out New Mexico State and nearly upset Jacksonville State on the road last week. The main reason being Keon Jennings re-emerging as a star as of late at quarterback. I think FIU has a definite edge coming in this game with the offense coming alive, as I think they've got the better defense as well. But Kennesaw has just found ways to keep games close, and I think they'll do the same again this week. But again, they'll fall short of victory in close fashion, this time 28-20. Next up is Arkansas State and ULM, 2 teams heading in complete opposite directions right now. ULM badly needing a win after losing 4 straight, now putting a bowl in jeopardy, and Arkansas State taking 3 of their last 4, albeit the wins coming against pretty inferior competition. This Arkansas State team has not been very impressive despite their record, but has found a way against the Sun Belt and are still alive in the race for the title game. ULM's offense has been non-existent, so even up against a defense who statistically looks as bad as this one, I have a hard time taking them to snap their streak on the road when there's something on the line on the other side as well. Give me Arkansas State here, 30-23. Staying in the Sun Belt, South Alabama heads to Southern Miss in a similar spot as I just mentioned with Arkansas State. They're just a game out in the Sun Belt, and this is an absolute layup for them this week. Southern Miss has been obliterated back-to-back games with Marshall and Texas State, and to be honest, I think South Alabama makes it 3 straight this week. They've got an offense that's exploded at times this season and just took down previously the best team in conference on the road at Louisiana. There's no reason to let Southern Miss hang at all, so give me South Alabama 41-10. Charlotte heads to FAU this week with both programs undergoing a leadership change, with Biff Poggi and Tom Herman both being fired this past weekend. So who really knows if we see anything different from either of these teams this week, but based on recent play, it's been really ugly on both sides. Charlotte's lost 4 straight with only Memphis being close, and FAU dropping 5 straight with only 2 of their games coming close. Most recently falling to Temple in overtime last week. The offense has been bad, but now that Fancher's out, it was even worse last week. But both of these defenses have been god-awful too. This is an obvious toss-up matchup with so much up in the air, so I'll lean with FAU at home close, 27-24. Texas takes on Kentucky this week, looking to stay atop the SEC ahead of their showdown with Texas A&M next week. A game I definitely think they could be looking ahead to here with the size of it as well as the return of that rivalry. Kentucky's had a disastrous season, but if there's one thing they can hang their hat on this season, it's the defense being pretty solid all year long. Aside from the Florida game, they've held some great teams in check. Tennessee to 28, Ole Miss to 17, and Georgia to 13. And although Texas is a different game, I wouldn't rule out a similar performance. But with how bad Kentucky's offense has been, and this being a road game though, I just don't see them competing long enough to really have a chance. But all things considered, I think a cover could be in play. I'll take Texas, just 31-13. Now on to Penn State at Minnesota. Drew Aller was nearly perfect last week against Purdue. That's back-to-back really impressive outings since the Ohio State loss from him, and this Penn State team is rolling. Tyler Warren is an absolute weapon and being used as such this season, but Minnesota's pass defense could be a tougher challenge in Minneapolis. The Gophers got a bye week after the Rutgers loss to fix things and prepare for this one. And statistically, they still look good, but they folded when Brosmer and the run game were finally slowed down by an opposing defense. Penn State has the defensive talent to shut them down again and wear out that Minnesota defense, and I think they leave with a 2-score win because of that, 31-17. BYU's undefeated season was snapped last week in the loss to Kansas. I'm kicking myself for not picking that as I really thought it was a likely outcome, but trusted the undefeated record to thrive in the night game. But now BYU has to try and avoid spiraling here, and they've got another tough matchup, this time on the road at Arizona State. Cam Scadaboo is back, and the Sun Devils gave Kansas State the work last week in their own building thanks to Sam Levitt's big day. This team has really been a surprise this season, and now they're a win away here from a chance at making the title game next week. The BYU defense proved again last week it can shut down great offenses, but they struggle to find any offense themselves. And after that loss on the road, I think Arizona State hands them another one, 27-21. Continuing on from the last game, Kansas had another big game this week after their BYU win. They'll take on Colorado at home, who sits near the top of the Big 12 right now, and is getting closer and closer to a playoff spot. They'll probably have to win the conference to get in because of the schedule, but it's been a great year for prime time in the Buffs. But this is probably the biggest test to date now, on the road against a red-hot Kansas team who just pulled off 2 upsets in a row and is staring bowl eligibility in the face right now. This could be a one hell of a game between 2 great offenses, one that Travis Hunter could certainly take over and command a lead as Heisman favorite late into November. But man, the way the Jayhawks are playing right now, I think they give Colorado its first loss in over a month in a thriller, 34-30. Michigan's coming off a bye in desperation mode for a win this week, sitting at 5-5 with a road matchup with Ohio State next. They cannot afford to drop this game. Luckily for them, it's Northwestern coming into town, so they should be able to get it done unless they lay another egg, which is definitely possible with this offense. We'll see if Will Johnson returns, which would obviously be a massive boost for the defense, which still has been great at times. Jack Lausch's mobility may extend some drives, so they'll need to be sharp to avoid Northwestern finding any offense. It's going to be pretty cold in Ann Arbor, though, and Northwestern's offense has actually been worse this season than Michigan's. This should be a low-scoring game, and probably enough to let Northwestern cover, but give me Michigan 24-17. Wisconsin's at Nebraska this week with both team seasons kind of spiraling into losing streaks, but Wisconsin really gave Oregon a scare and were a couple plays away from stealing that game from the Ducks. Nebraska's on a 4-game losing streak of their own after the USC loss, but Dylan Raiola guaranteed victory for the Huskers this week. That could definitely fire either team up. After a 5-1 start, the Huskers badly needed some juice to get over the hump and reach a bowl, but this one's going to be just as tough as the rest with the way the Badger defense played last week, and Nebraska has just been so bad lately as a program in one-score games, as well as highly important ones. If Wisconsin plays anything like they did against Oregon as opposed to the previous two, I think they win this game straight up. It just depends on which team shows up to Lincoln, but following that trend, I am going to take them on the road here close, 24-20. Cal looks to bounce back this week after the ugly loss to Syracuse in a big game this week, literally called the big game as they host in-state rival Stanford, who's coming off an incredible overtime win over Louisville, entering it as 3-score underdogs. It was a game full of big plays for Stanford, with Louisville outperforming them by a fair amount, but giving up big play after big play to keep Stanford in it. As for Cal, they ran all over Syracuse early, but turnovers and a red-hot Cuse offense forced them to abandon it and try to come from behind through the air. I think from that perspective, last week could be seen as a bit of a fluke for both of these teams, and Cal's simply just a much better team than Stanford. But we'll have to see if those results bleed into this week too. For now, with the 6th win on the line and heading into SMU next week, I like Cal to win this one by a pretty good margin, 38-21. Oklahoma State is back in action after the bye, taking on Texas Tech this week, and we'll see if this team has any fight left in them after seemingly quitting on the season a couple weeks ago. They've now lost 7 straight games, and the last game and a half just being downright ugly. Just 13 points put up against an awful TCU defense, and their own defense continuing to get demolished, giving up 500 yards a game on the year now. Texas Tech's offense is just as strong as TCU's. The defense not so much, but if Oklahoma State has really quit, Texas Tech could be able to run away with this one offensively. I say Ollie Gordon has another solid day, though, and puts up some points against an awful defense, but I'll take Texas Tech to win it, 37-27. West Virginia and UCF face off this week, both desperate for wins to get bowl eligible. UCF needing to win this one and beat Utah, and West Virginia needing either this one or Texas Tech next week. And honestly, I'm not really sure what to expect from West Virginia at this point. They show up on the road back-to-back games as underdogs and win outright, and then come back home and give up nearly 50 to Baylor. This UCF team may be 4-6, but RJ Harvey is one of the best backs in the country, and as an offense, they rank at the top of the Big 12 in yardage. This could be another nightmare game for the Mountaineer defense against a Knights team with their backs up against the wall. Dylan Risk nearly upset Arizona State last time out, and they had a bye to get him even more prepared. I think West Virginia falls again because of that defensive mismatch, 38-31. Utah State absolutely shocked me last week when they not only upset Hawaii, but gave them an absolute whooping, 55-10 over a team who I thought was playing their best ball coming into that matchup. This week, they'll host San Diego State, who enters on a 4-game skid to a really rough schedule, having faced Boise, UNLV, Washington State, and New Mexico recently. They'll get an easier defense this week at Utah State, but an offense who I just mentioned hung 55 on Hawaii last week and has put up some big performances all year long. I don't think we get quite the same performance out of Utah State this week, especially defensively, but San Diego State's offense is just terrible. Second to last in the conference. I'm going to go with Utah State to stay hot at home here because of that, 38-28. Coastal Carolina takes on Georgia Southern this week in an important game for both squads. Georgia Southern looking to stay alive in the Sun Belt, and Coastal looking to reach a bowl game. This is a pretty tough call with a lot at stake, but Georgia Southern had a big opportunity at an easier win last week and flat out lost at home to Troy. The offense was completely missing in that game and now put them a game behind Marshall despite having the head-to-head win. Coastal is not an easy game at all, though. They handled App State and hung with Marshall and Louisiana in recent weeks. It's really been the road losses that look bad, getting blown out by JMU and Troy. But at home, they've played well enough, and I think they've got enough reason to show up again here. I like Coastal close, 30-27. North Texas will look to end a 4-game skid this week as they host a surging East Carolina team who sits 3-0 now post-Mike Houston era. The first two coming as blowout wins, but last week's Tulsa game being one they had to survive late. For North Texas, the 4-game streak has mainly been a matter of the schedule, with Memphis, Tulane, and Army being a ridiculously tough 3-game stretch, and then immediately followed by a road game at UTSA where they still haven't lost at home all season. This is a big opportunity to right the ship and snap a streak, but they'll have to slow down a Pirate offense that's still rolling. Despite 3 interceptions from Caden Hauser last week, they still put up 38 on Tulsa and over 500 yards on the day. I fully expect this game to be a shootout between two offenses that can really score, but give me North Texas to finally come out on top this week, 41-34. South Florida will face Tulsa this week, still needing one more win for bowl eligibility, and despite Tulsa's best effort last week against East Carolina, this team still has shown they can get absolutely rain out of games, especially on the road. South Florida responded to the Navy loss by hanging 59 on Charlotte, arguably a better team than Tulsa this season, and they could still be getting Byron Brown back this week as he nearly suited up this past Saturday but ended up sitting again. Even if Brown doesn't play, I like South Florida's offense to continue rolling and dominate, but with Brown healthy, this team can play even better than that. I'm taking them again this week, 41-21. Back to the Power 5, we've got Pitt at Louisville, a game both these teams could really use to put losses behind them. Pitt enters on a 3-game skid to SMU, Virginia, and Clemson, and Louisville's coming off a disgusting loss to Stanford on the road last week. There's nothing major on the line here for either team, so no real edge in that department, and statistically, these teams have been pretty even all year. Louisville having a slight offensive advantage and Pitt having the slight defensive edge. I think Pitt proved last week they can still battle and this game should be close, coming down to matchups and avoiding turnovers. And matchup-wise, I favor Louisville slightly here because of their pass defense. So I'll take Louisville at home close, 31-27. Back to the SEC, we've got another cupcake game with Arkansas hosting Louisiana Tech. And despite this being a clear talent disparity, Louisiana Tech's played by far their best football of the season lately, especially defensively, where they completely shut down UTEP, Sam Houston, and Western Kentucky, and they were a failed Hail Mary away from Jacksonville State as well. They can definitely hang around if Arkansas allows them to, but this sort of feels like a game where Arkansas looks to lay the wood on their opponent. They've dealt with a loaded schedule this season, taking on 6 ranked opponents, and they've got Missouri on the road next week. Whenever they've had a chance to face a weaker team, they've taken advantage offensively, and I think Taylon Green and Jaquindon Jackson explode after being shut out by Texas last time out. I like Arkansas big here, 41-14. Staying in the SEC, this time we've got a conference matchup with Missouri on the road at Mississippi State. This is a game Missouri absolutely has to have, as regardless of how their season's gone, they are just a far and away more talented team in this game. They were one stop away from beating South Carolina on the road last week and finally found the offense with Brady Cook back in the game. The issue is how easily Lenora Sellers tore up that secondary, which has actually been a big strength of the Tigers this season. They should be able to get back in order this week, though, as Mississippi State just doesn't match up well here, and Michael Van Buren's just a freshman with little to no help around him. Just 92 passing yards last time out against Tennessee, and I think Missouri capitalizes on that to pick up the win on the road by 2 scores, 34-21. Louisiana got some rough news last week as Ben Woldridge left the game with a broken collarbone, but the Cajuns have a quality backup in Chandler Fields who has a good amount of experience. Still a huge blow to the offense with Woldridge. They were 8-2 this season. Fields did a nice job trying to make the comeback last week, but fell short giving Louisiana their first loss in the Sun Belt. But still, a game up in the standings right now. They've got a lot to play for still. Troy's coming in hot, though, winning 2 in a row over Coastal and Georgia Southern. 2 decent teams who could not stop Troy's offense, which has finally emerged, and Georgia Southern was completely shut out by the Trojan defense. With the way they're playing and a new quarterback at the helm for Louisiana, this could be another potential upset from Troy, but I do think Louisiana is too good to drop this one, even if it's close. I'm taking them by 1 score, 28-20. Now on to a big one this week with Notre Dame taking on Army from the Bronx at Yankee Stadium. The biggest Army-Notre Dame matchup in a long time, and one I can't wait to see with how well both these teams are playing this season, and Army having an additional week of prep time. Still undefeated, Army last took down North Texas with several red zone takeaways, holding them just 3 points on the day, but Army's also had the luxury of an incredibly easy schedule to this point. North Texas is arguably the best team they've beaten right now, and Notre Dame continues to prove they're a playoff caliber team with blowout wins coming every week. They've won 5 in a row in blowout fashion, and the lone loss on the year is still the Northern Illinois upset. I think this team is unbelievably locked in on both sides of the ball right now and will finally hand Army their first loss of the year fairly easily. I'm going 34-17 Irish. Boise State survived an early scare from San Jose State and got a late pick 6 to pad the lead last week and end up blowing out the Spartans on the road. And this week they'll stay on the road as they head to Wyoming to take on the 2-8 Cowboys. Wyoming's defense hung around with Colorado State last week, giving up just 24, but the offense couldn't muster up anything besides a 62-yard run leading to their lone touchdown of the night. And simply put, I think this Boise State team is just much better on both sides of the ball. Ashton Genty is going to put up freakish numbers as always this week, and the Boise State defense should be able to limit Wyoming maybe completely. This game should not be close unless they're giving up big plays to set up easy scores for the Cowboys. So give me Boise State big on the road, 42-14. We finally got the Pac-2 matchup this week with Washington State and Oregon State, a new rivalry as Washington State's coach mentioned, so we'll see if that transfers onto the field as well, maybe firing up the Beavers enough to give them a fighting chance in this game. It's been an ugly year for Oregon State, dropping 5 straight, with the last 3 all coming in ugly fashion. This could definitely end up being a similar way, but Washington State hasn't given much of a reason lately to think they'll perform on the road. They struggled with Fresno and San Diego State, and then lost last week's matchup at New Mexico. This could yet be another road game where they don't show up to their best. Oregon State has been brutal lately, but I think they come to play with a bit more on the line this week, and maybe even an exciting environment supporting them. I'll take Washington State to win this one though, 35-24. Baylor and Houston face off in an in-state Big 12 battle with not much more than bragging rights at stake. Houston's bowl hopes are still alive, but looking really slim with a road game at BYU coming up in the finale, so a chance to send off the seniors with a win is really all there is here. And with the way Baylor's offense is playing right now, that's going to be a tough task. They put up at least 37 in 4 straight games now, and 49 just last week at West Virginia. Houston's defense is much tougher than their last 3 opponents, though, sitting 3rd in the Big 12, so I don't expect the same output from Baylor. But offensively, this Cougar team is really challenged, dead last by a wide margin in the conference, and put up just 3 points at Arizona last week. They fare much better at home, though, and have beaten some solid teams this season, so I'm not going to put it past them and expect them to hang around. But I do think Baylor's offense just outlasts them this week, 27-23. Texas State is finally on a roll after a rough middle patch of the season, winning back-to-back games in blowout fashion, and now getting another easy one with Georgia State at home. The Panthers have lost 7 in a row despite hanging around in several of the losses, but even unable to beat Arkansas State in their first game back home in over a month, I see no reason to think they'll have much of a chance in this game. Texas State should win this game by multiple scores, and they're getting contributions from everyone right now. Against ULM, it was a rushing attack, and then with Southern Miss, that continued as well, as McLeod lighting them up through the air as well. 20 could prove to be too much, but with a losing streak as long as this one, and an offense running as well as the Bobcats are, I don't mind it. I've got Texas State 42-17. Now back over to the SEC, we've got Alabama on the road at Oklahoma. A big game for both teams, as obviously Alabama cannot lose if it wants to make the playoffs. And Oklahoma with a chance to shock the world playing spoiler and pick up a huge win to secure bowl eligibility before they head to LSU next week. But when it comes to this game, I really don't love Oklahoma's chances. Alabama's offense is on fire right now and just showed up on the road at LSU a few weeks ago. So Oklahoma's defensive strength may not matter much at all in the end of this one, and the offense is not trustworthy whatsoever, especially against a team like this. In their big games this season, Oklahoma hasn't managed any success at all. Even in the Missouri game, they only scored 23 because of the defense. I don't see anything changing for them in this spot with a focused Bama team on fire, so I'll take the Tide 31-14. Staying in the SEC, Texas A&M heads to Auburn this week. Maybe a potential trap game as they could be looking ahead to Texas next week, but at the same time, they won't be making the playoffs without winning both of these games, so the focus should be still on this week's game in a tough environment. A&M's last time on the road was a thumping from South Carolina in the second half, where they could not stop Sellers or Sanders all game long, and they couldn't find anything themselves in that second half offensively. Auburn's a much different team than South Carolina, but A&M's going to have to find more offense than that if they want to survive this one. This game obviously has clear upset potential. I just don't think Auburn's offense has shown any reason to think they'll score enough to finish the job. I'm leaning towards A&M holding on late and making next week's game a huge one, 30-24. Iowa State's on the road at Utah this week, a team that's lost 6 straight now, including the recent throttling by Colorado. Turnovers continue to be a problem for Isaac Wilson. This Utah defense got absolutely carved up by the Buffs. This game should be a bit closer as it is in Utah, but Iowa State is still a really tough draw. Despite the recent losses, the Cyclones got back last week with a big win over Cincinnati. The pass defense completely shut down Sorsby, and Rocco Becht had a big day for their offense. Utah's going to have to be able to run the ball with a lot of success to have a chance at winning this game, and that's been a weak point for the Cyclones this year, but with no passing ability and a defense that just got gashed, I don't think Utah's going to be able to win this one. I like Iowa State by 10, 27-17. Old Dominion sneaked out a cover last week with a late 2-point conversion, and now has lost 2 in a row, putting them in must-win territory with 6 losses on the year. And this week's a big one up against current Sun Belt East leader Marshall at home. Like I mentioned last week, Old Dominion plays pretty well at home and had a lead on James Madison for a bit of that game until a second half run. And I still don't think this Marshall team is as good as that JMU team when both teams are playing their best. There's a lot on the line though, and I'm expecting a great game here, but Old Dominion's got a clear advantage on the ground against the Marshall defense. And I think they take advantage to get one step closer to a bowl. I'm taking Old Dominion 28-23. LSU's in desperate need of a win this week as they host Vanderbilt, coming off the 3 straight losses to A&M, Alabama, and Florida last week. Vandy had a bye to regroup after the South Carolina loss where they could not find any offense in that one, and I think it came at a great time as this LSU team is really vulnerable. Nussmeier's not playing well at all, and the defense is getting gashed 3 weeks in a row now. A loss here could be really detrimental for the coaching staff, who may just be holding on with that Bryce Underwood commitment. So I think we see a desperate LSU team, as I said, and they play some better football. As we've seen out of Vandy all year, though, they can hang around and have played up to their competition all year long besides South Carolina. There's no reason to think they can't hang again here, but give me LSU to escape, 27-24. Kansas State was one of the biggest disappointments of last week's games, getting ran out of their own building by Arizona State. They couldn't stop Sam Leavitt and continue to struggle offensively, as they've now dropped back-to-back games by scoring under 20 points. This week they'll face an equally spiraling Cincinnati team on a 3-game losing streak themselves. One of these teams is going to have to snap out of it this week, and based on how this matchup seems, I lean towards it being Kansas State. Not only have they been better for the majority of the season, but they've also got a major advantage defensively. They're the top run defense in the Big 12, and Cincinnati really relies on Corey Kiner and Brendan Sorsby's legs. I think this is yet another game where Cincinnati's offense struggles to find the end zone, and Kansas State's offense will take advantage finally. I like the Wildcats here, 31-21. Next is Duke and Virginia Tech. Another tough game to pick with a ton of questions surrounding the status of Kyron Drones, Malachi Thomas, and Bashal Tutin for this week. All three are listed as questionable and may be game-time decisions, and without them, I really don't know how well Tech will fare against this Duke defense on the road. We've seen this crowd come alive in night games before, so I definitely think they'll need them to win this game. But honestly, outside of the late second half collapse against Miami, this Blue Devil team is playing pretty well lately, taking SMU to overtime and beating NC State on the road. So with as much up in the air for Virginia Tech as there is, as well as this being a tough road matchup against a great defense, I'm going with Duke to get it done as a home dog again, 27-23. Now over to the new look Big Ten. It's a crosstown battle of USC and UCLA from the Rose Bowl, and a much different looking game now than earlier on in the season. Aside from the Washington loss, UCLA was playing great football lately and has a shot at a bowl game with a win here. And even with the Nebraska win, USC has not been impressive at all this season, so much so that Jade Mayava replaced Miller Moss at quarterback, and did well enough last week to earn a second start here. But Nebraska still hung around for too long in my opinion, and USC still does not look trustworthy. UCLA has the group to limit Woody Marks and get some pressure on Mayava to make this a tight game. So if Ethan Garbers is on a roll, they can absolutely take this game from USC. And considering USC's defensive struggles this season, I think UCLA can pull off the upset at home here. I like the spread much more, but I'm picking them straight up as well, 31-28. Next is Air Force at Nevada. Air Force has finally found their identity again as playing better football, taking down Fresno State and completely shutting out Oregon State last week. This week's a bit of a different test though, with Nevada being such a strong running team who just gave Boise State some fits. But as we've seen all over the course of the season, they can still get beat by average teams. If Air Force continues to have the success they've been having, they could continue their winning streak here. We'll see if they have an answer for Brandon Lewis, but I think he's a bit of a different challenge than their past two matchups were. Nevada is getting some guys back on defense, which could obviously help their chances as well here. So I'll go with Nevada close, 27-20. Lastly, we move on to Colorado State at Fresno State, a massive game in the Mountain West as Colorado State looks to get closer to the Mountain West title game here. This one's definitely going to be tough against a great quarterback in Mikey Keene, but he's had zero help lately from his run game with Malik Sherrod out. The offensive line hasn't blocked well at all, and Fresno State seemingly quit a bit lately as they've been dropping games to Hawaii and Air Force. This team obviously still has the talent to win games like this, and I think they genuinely should. It just depends on how they show up, and lately they haven't cared at all, and Colorado State has a ton on the line in this game. Because of that and the lack of any rushing ability from Fresno State, I think Colorado State stays red hot and takes this one on the road, 28-24. That's it for my Week 13 picks. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, as well as any of your upset predictions and which games you're most excited to watch this week. As always, thanks for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.